Hey kids, and welcome to Mrs. Hurst's wood shop. Just kidding, it's actually my husband's. But I wanted to show you some things around our shop today that might help us with our lesson. So today we're going to be working on multiplicative comparisons. I know, it's a huge word. You can try it with me if you want. Multiplicative comparisons. And when you hear that, you might be going, oh my goodness, what is she talking about? Well, it's actually not as difficult as it seems. So multiplicative is another word that we can use for multiplication, which you guys have been working on for the past several weeks with me, and you're getting very good if I do say so myself. Think about this. 4 times 5. That's an equation we see sometimes. Or 3 times what is the same as 20. We see these equations oftentimes in class, and we work together to solve them. Well, do we really know what those comparisons mean? So a multiplicative comparison is just saying that when we have a multiplication problem or equation like 5 times 4, it's the same as a comparison, and we have to think about it that way. So I'm going to show you some examples around the farm and around the shop that uses comparisons to show you what we really do when we multiply. All right, real world example number 1. I need these rods to do something very important in my new chicken coop. And they have to be the right measurements. And we're gonna make a comparison here in a second. But first, I am gonna cut this rod a little bit, so bear with me. So the reason I just cut this rod, and it's gonna help us start thinking about those comparisons, it's gonna help with our lesson, is because I needed a rod that was 2 times as tall as this one. So I had to cut it so that it matched exactly the way I needed it to. So the way to think about how many times taller or times bigger or times smaller it is you have to think about how many times it could actually fit into the other one. Or how many times would I have to put them on top of each other to make it the same as the other one. So for example, this rod is 2 times as tall or 2 times as long as this rod. Now we're gonna test our theory. The rod is 1 time as tall. It's not 0 times as tall, because if it was 0 times as tall, there would be nothing. We know that anything times 0 is 0. But it's definitely 1 time as tall. Do you agree? Yeah. Now we're gonna check if it's 2 times as tall. I'm gonna put my fingers in the middle there. Look at that. 2 times as tall. Now, it's not 3 times as tall. If it was 3 times as tall, that rod would have to be a whole nother rod this size bigger, okay? Now, some people get confused and they might say, well, this rod is 1 times as tall as that rod. It's not 1 times as tall though, because this rod could fit into this one 2 times. Okay, so a lot of you on your pre-test, and I even do this sometimes too, we have to think how many times bigger is it? 1 time would just be the exact same size. So this one is 2 times. Okay, so some real world application for you. Okay, so we have a very special visitor, but I did take him from his feeding time, so I hope he's ready to join us. Come on in, Gilbert. I'm sorry, buddy. You can go back to eating right after this. So Gilbert wanted to show you something for your lesson as well, because today in your lesson, you're gonna actually be comparing some things to each other and to the giant's door that kind of looks like this. So here's my garage door, and here's the first panel. And this first panel is 3 times as tall as Gilbert, okay? So that means that 3 of Gilbert should fit in this panel, or his height. So here's 1 Gilbert. Here's 2 Gilberts, and here's 3 Gilberts. So this door panel is 3 times as tall as Mr. Gilbert here. Thanks for joining us. All right, up next we have my buddy old pal Zillow, and she is not gonna sit for very long because she is tired. But as you can see, she is the same height as the panel there. So if Gilbert was in here, I was too afraid to let him in here because she does like to eat chickens. If Gilbert was in here, we know that Gilbert is 1/3 of that panel. The panel is 3 times as tall as Gilbert. So if Zillow is the same height, she's just as tall as that panel, imagine Gilbert right here. So that would mean if we did a comparison, she's sitting down. Okay, she's as tall as the panel. Then that would mean that Zillow is 3 times as tall as Gilbert. All right, so one last step to thinking about multiplicative comparisons. Not only can I compare things like Zillow is 3 times as tall as Gilbert, or the rod is 2 times as tall as the first rod, but I can also make equations and solve problems using that information. So let's think about this. Zillow was 3 times as tall as Gilbert. So basically that means we could have 3 Gilberts standing on top of each other and they'd finally be as tall as Zillow. Well, we're gonna practice something together. Gilbert, I actually measured him while he was standing there. Gilbert is 10 inches tall. Okay, so Gilbert is 10 inches tall. And we know that Zillow is 3 times as tall as Gilbert. So I'm wondering how I could make that into an equation to figure out how tall Zillow is. So Gilbert's 10 inches tall. Zillow is 3 times as tall as Gilbert. How tall is Zillow? Give you some time to think about that one. Did you guess 30 inches? If you did, you are right on track with me. So again, let's think about this. We had Gilbert who was 10 inches tall, and we knew that Zillow was 3 times as tall as Gilbert. So that means our equation would be 10 inches from the chicken times 3, because Zillow was 3 times as tall. And if we take 10 times 3, you guys are really good at this, we know that 10 times 3 is 30. So yes, Zillow is 30 inches tall. Now, I'm hoping today that you learned that multiplicative comparisons actually aren't as scary as they sound. A multiplicative comparison is just when we look at an equation or look at a multiplication problem and we think about how it's actually a comparison. And we're not adding, we're not subtracting, we're thinking about how many times something can fit into another thing, okay? Whether that's height or how long something is or how tall something is or how many groups there are, and you guys are really good at doing this. We also learned how to take those comparisons and make them into equations to solve problems. And we do this stuff all the time, okay? And today you're gonna get a chance to practice making comparisons and then using equations to solve problems. So I'm so glad that you joined me today. I know my videos are usually pretty cheesy, but if they help you learn, then that makes me happy. Please share this with your friends, your family, anybody that wants to learn about multiplicative comparisons, and I will see you next time.